We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Dr. Logan Cohen, and he's a therapist, and he specializes in trauma. And I discovered him on TikTok, and we were just talking about he does so many great videos and touches on so many subjects that I have found that people talk about that, have questions about, and we don't hear therapists talking about them. So I was telling you, Logan, that we could be doing several podcasts with your videos. They're so great. And I'll let you introduce yourself. And real quickly wanted to talk about what we're going to talk about, which is this is a great subject, as nobody talks about this, the angry stage of healing. And I was just sharing with you a little bit that I still struggle with that. It pops up. And so I wanted to kind of get into that. And then if we have time, even talk about survival mode, because I think we need to understand what that is and how to get out of it. Because I lived
Sure.
a good part of my adult life in survival mode, and it wasn't fun at all.
hmm It's
So
very American.
uh, is it?
We live in a fundamentally capitalist system, and us being a capitalist economy is really the foundation of our culture. And within that is the assumption that the more productive you are, the more value you have as a human. So there's a lot of reinforcement for being in fight or flight.
That's true. You are right. You are absolutely right. As a matter of fact, I quit my corporate job almost 2 years ago, and it was that very thing. I found myself in survival mode, and it was a toxic environment, and it was really affecting me a lot, and so I needed to leave.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's start with why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, sure. My name is Logan Cohen, and I always introduce myself primarily as a father and a husband. I think it's one of my own ways to also remind myself what is most of value to me and what I need to prioritize and hold myself accountable to even starting out with not being in survival mode. And I'm actually not a doctor. I'm not an MD, and nor do I have a PhD.
Ah.
I am an official nerd. Um,
I'm right there with you.
and and we were talking about the book a little bit coming in, and if that is something that folks have interest in, when it's written to be appreciated and consumed by lay people. However, folks who are academics will also find a lot of value in it. I mean, there are like 200 to 300 peer-reviewed journals referenced within it. I mean, it can read like an academic uh, piece of didactic literature.
Hmm.
Um, let's see. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Studied marriage and family therapy initially is my foundation. I also supervise for the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. I supervise provisionally licensed practitioners and oversee their license and their practice until they're fully
Mm.
licensed. I'm also a level 2 clinical certified trauma professional. I've always specialized in working with folks who have survived trauma, both little t and big T trauma,
Hmm.
and then both working with them individually and helping them getting relief from their symptoms, as well as working with the relationships that they're participating in that tend to be some versions of higher conflict. And relatively early along the way, realized the importance of recognizing and intervening in domestic abuse.
Mm.
And so the information that you see me sharing in social media land that touches on those areas, it's kind of a culmination of all this work that I've done over the last 20 years.
Hmm.
Um, So I'm the author of a book. I do some social media influencer stuff. Um, and I also do some speaking and training with corporations, with businesses around um, reworking their human resources
Mm-hmm.
departments as well as the culture of those corporate institutions
Nice.
to be inclusive and affirming of mental health issues.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. We need more of that for sure. Oh, thank you. Okay, well then let's why don't we start talking about the angry stage of healing?
Sure.
I'll have some input once you get going, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Stories or whatever.
Yeah. It's at the end of the day, healing from trauma will involve grief. Not all
Hmm.
grief is traumatic, but all trauma involves loss, and there will be grieving involved.
Oh, yeah.
And the first emotional experience that punches through the denial and shock of this loss is anger. Right. So the phases of grief, you initially have denial and shock, then there's anger, then there's a bargaining phase.
Hmm.
Um, and then eventually get to this sadness and loss. I tend to refer to as the heart of grief until you get spat out into acceptance. Um, and acceptance about what happened, the losses you sustained, who you are relative to them, as well as accepting where your locus of control actually lies. And then from this much more informed position, you can continue on your journey with integrating that information. So a lot of people get stuck in
Hmm.
the anger phase of that grief that's involved in healing um, because it is a relatively safe place to
Emotion.
be.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's what I think because going deeper and
Hmm.
hitting the emotional part, ooh,
Hmm.
because I try really
Hmm.
hard not to cry. I'm breaking that, but that I don't want to
Good.
go down that deep, right? That's what I used to
It's
think.
vulnerable. It's
Oh,
vulnerable, which
and
feels
whenever
unsafe.
it,
Yeah,
and as a child, every time I was vulnerable, it was taken advantage of. So,
absolutely,
mhm,
absolutely. And what I also find is, especially survivors of relational abuse, shame comes in to repress and dampen the rest of the emotions. That's part of its evolutionary purpose. That is kind of how it serves us in the moment. Is it protects us from other unpleasant or vulnerable emotions by dampening them, repressing them, and keeping them in the unconscious. But whatever we resist will persist. So
mhm,
what shame also does in the long term is it keeps us from working through them.
mhm,
So whether it is in the context of relational abuse, it's also it tends to happen with men and women in some different ways that are socially and culturally reinforced. It has nothing to do with our sexual plumbing and like the differences that we have as an organism. These are all social constructs that train and condition these differences, where a lot of times women are constantly receiving these messages that anger is ugly,
mhm.
that anger will make you less of a woman. It makes you look like this like hysterical person that's not going to find a mate. You're taking up too much space. You're advocating for yourself. You're going to
You're too
intimidate the
much.
boys
You're too
too
much.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then shame will come in and help repress or dampen that anger, which also doesn't give us permission to work through it and integrate it
Mhm,
as a human, try to figure out what it's trying to teach us. All emotions are supposed to be their own part of intuitive wisdom. What's going to work
mhm.
for us, what's not going to work for us, as well as giving us energy, even just on a hormonal neurochemical level, to go towards or away from what meets our personal integrity or what doesn't. And with men, we're often taught that vulnerable emotion is a sign of weakness, is a
Mhm.
sign of irrationality.
Mhm.
But you can be angry. Men and
Yeah,
boys are allowed to be angry. No one's going to take away a man card for that.
that is
In
so
fact,
true.
they'll say boys will be boys. And so men tend to get even a lot of reinforcement for sitting in their anger,
Hmm.
um, and don't know how to explore and attune to all the vulnerable emotions underneath of it.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
some of the different ways that each
Yeah.
gender tends to get stuck in it, that's socially and culturally reinforced, and as well as through the grief process, how it can seem very attractive to hang out in anger
Yeah.
rather than deal with the vulnerability that's waiting on us on the other side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And some of this anger is, I think what I got from your video is like things like realizing that you were taken advantage of, or realizing
Yeah.
the depth of it. Because like honestly, this happened in my last marriage because I married a narcissist. I had no idea he was a narcissist until after we got married. And even after we got married, I didn't know the label, but the behavior was outrageous. And that's what got my attention. And I had done enough healing to realize that, okay, this is, there's something weird going on here. And he was gaslighting, and I didn't know that term, but that's what he was doing. He was gaslighting. He was making me out to be crazy. And I knew there was something wrong. And he has since passed. But I still find myself getting angry over that stuff, especially the
Mm-hmm.
narcissist. Because, and what I didn't realize either, as I was taking care of him while he was dying, he was telling people lies about me. And
Yeah.
so that will trigger me. And I will catch myself getting really angry about that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an example of the kind of anger you're talking about. Or, I guess realizing as a child that maybe I didn't realize I was being abused and it wasn't fair. And now looking back as an adult, I can realize that and I could be angry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely. And the purpose of the anger in the moment, the phrase that I used earlier was each emotion reflects some intuitive wisdom of our higher
Mm-hmm.
self, of our being. And the intuitive wisdom of anger is someone stepping on our toes.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is crossing boundaries with us that's resulting in us not being able to meet our personal integrity. So it's designed to point out where that is happening and give us energy to set limits and set boundaries.
Bring it to our attention so that we now focus on it and take care of it. And you
Yeah,
were
address
mentioning
it.
earlier about shame. And
Mm-hmm.
I've always wondered what good is shame, because I feel like in my experience and when I've worked with other women who have been healing from abuse and all share the same thing, we all share
Sure.
shame. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel good. I don't see any good in it. But
Mm-hmm.
what I heard you say was that in the moment, the shame stops you and catches your attention. So there is a positive emotion to it. When it becomes
Mm-hmm.
negative is when we hang on to that shame, because that shame shut my voice down.
Yeah, when we internalize it, and it's a very easy one to internalize. So I would encourage us to think about shame as the first socialization agent of human beings.
Okay.
And it's still used in this way in isolated farming communities and in fundamentalist cultures.
Hmm.
So, like if you, instance, like the Amish,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
right? Like they will shun you if you do something against the culture of that civilization. And it's so the design of it is to avoid rejection and abandonment from your tribe.
Right.
The tribalism of human beings is what set us on a different evolutionary path from our genetic ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like chimpanzees, one on the ground, much less and even more in the trees, will pick a human being apart. Some big ones literally like grab an arm and rip it off of your torso. Like we are not physically yoked to that animal. However, a dynamic group of us that have taught each other how to make tools and hunting strategically hunt the animals that hunt them.
Mm.
This was required for ascending the food chain for
Mm-hmm.
human beings. Without our social drives, we would not have been successful hunters. We would not have developed the relatively enormous brains that we have in our body, and we would not have had the capacity as an organism as we do today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is why it takes up so much room in our limbic system still, in our central nervous system still. And it's a very power. It's not only an emotion; it's also a survival response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that now. Yeah, and I just see that when the shame goes out of balance, I mean, I will tell you that the shame shut my voice down for a good 40 years.
Oh yeah.
And I try to find that exact switch where all of a sudden I wasn't feeling that shame anymore, to where I'm now sharing stories that I have never shared with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and of course the motivation behind that is so that people can connect and understand and that. But
Normalize it. Sure. Good
yeah,
point.
normalize it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like I'm not the only one, so interesting. So I that is really I'm really glad you clarified that about shame, because I honestly was of the mindset like there's no use for it. There's like no use for it whatsoever because my experience has been so negative about it. But it's where this is where, and I've talked about it so much in my podcast, where self-awareness comes in, and that is where we have to watch that shame and make sure that that shame doesn't carry on.
Absolutely. I mean, and whether it's being helpful as a big evolutionary catalyst for human beings to get to where we are currently, as well as it lights up when we do something that we're disgusted with.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be very healthy and pro-social,
Mm-hmm.
but only if you can consciously work through it.
Right.
If you repress it, the likelihood that it's folded into self-denial and a lack
Mm-hmm.
of self-awareness and then gets projected onto other people,
Yep.
it's a bit of a keg powder emotion.
It is. It is. And so can you give us some tips? Give me some tips. I guess on like how to manage that. Cause I guess I kind of talked it out because being self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
being aware of the emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and then I call it processing.
That's what it is. And so I give you some tips, and but then you described how you do it quite effectively. So let's just break down what you did quite effectively in this processing. You identified what the emotion was.
Mhm.
I feel blank. So even just like put it in the framework of an I feel statement. Like I feel shame or disgust or deep embarrassment or feel small or insignificant when I'm treated like less of a human, and recall those experiences. Um, because I'm being dealt with like I'm less than, like I'm undeserving of connection and love,
Mhm. And possibly being rejected.
and running risk of rejection. And then the last part of that being I need blank, right? So we're just going to start informing the unmet needs
Mhm.
that are being informed by that emotional experience, so that you can go intentionally manifest that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And whether you can do this with yourself, if there are other trusted relationships that we
Yeah.
have, that people that can hold space with us
Mhm.
to process and co-regulate within.
Right.
There's uh, I'm a Jewish guy, so my knowledge of the Old Testament is significantly deeper than the New Testament. But
Right.
something that I am familiar with in the New Testament is how love and truth are intimately woven together conceptually all
Yes.
through. And I think this is a perfect example of it. Right. So the if we can have compassion with ourselves to feel what we feel, and if we can develop trusting relationships with other people who can have compassion and love with us and give us permission to feel what we feel and hold that space with us and actively listen and empathize with us, it actually gives us permission to work through that emotional experience, to
Yes.
regulate our central nervous system, and then seek more objective truth outside of the confirmation bias of
Mhm.
shame.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. And you're so right. We need a safe space with people. And sometimes that's really hard to find, but that has been really key for me, is finally having a safe space with someone outside of therapy, right? So
Oh yeah.
it was actually with my current husband. And I'm telling you, the first thing that created the safe space for me was getting my voice. I didn't even realize I didn't have a voice. Like, it was there that I discovered, oh, I was trying to have a conversation with him. It was a normal conversation and it wouldn't come out. It's
Yeah.
got stuck in my throat.
Yeah.
And he's like,
Yeah.
just say it. And I said, it won't come out. It won't
Yeah.
come out. And he's like, okay, well, we'll just take our time. And because he did that, because he didn't push me or belittle me or make it helped me. And not only do I now have a voice, but I'm able to articulate, which I wasn't able to do as well as I can now. And one thing that came to me when you were talking, when I said, I don't know exactly what helped me overcome that shame. And the key thing that I think helped, and I'm not sure what caused it, but I no longer made the shame my identity.
Mhm.
And all the stuff that I did or put in my head that I did that caused the shame within me,
Mhm.
as I started to realize, like, the abuse wasn't my fault, and the way that and we'll talk about it in a minute, but about survival mode and how I carried that for years. I carried a lot of shame with that, because when I was in survival mode, I did things that I wouldn't do outside of survival mode that I'm not proud of. And I had to do a lot of cleanup. And so that shame, I can see where it became my identity, and
Yeah.
it helped shut my voice down.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So what could we do? Well, we talked about what we could do to kind of get out of the shame, but how could we handle the anger? Because the shame is one, but the anger sometimes can just come out of nowhere. We can get triggered,
You can.
and
Mhm.
what can we do? I mean, I know for me what I can do when I'm triggered, which is recognize that I'm triggered, right? And understand what
Mhm.
those feelings are, which for me, I get the craziness in my head, and it's usually something I'm going to do that's going to self-sabotage myself.
Sure.
And then I take a breath. I take a pause, and I process it, and I try to figure out what's going on, and then I realize I'm triggered, and I'm not going to do the very thing that I really want to do, which is self-sabotage. I try to find something else that I can do that can help. So that's what I do when I'm triggered, but maybe somebody's getting angry there is not necessarily a trigger. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Am I making sense?
Yeah. So, I guess first let's take a bit of a step back and make it bigger so we can help it make more sense to everyone else who doesn't happen to be like a clinical nerd. Um,
Like you and
when
I.
so yeah, so the PTSD, the symptoms of PTSD are framed in two main categories. One is intrusive symptoms, aka fight or flight, and the other are avoidance symptoms, also known as freeze. Anger, as you're talking about it, we're not just talking about some like on a low level frustration
Right.
anger.
This is like you
You're
go from
talking
0
about
to 100.
rage.
Yeah, you go from 0 to 100 and
Yeah,
like that.
fight,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's an intrusive symptom.
Right.
It it comes in when your central nervous system is becoming dysregulated, and something is not fair, not
Yeah.
reasonable, and you're not willing to run.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one other option
Fight.
when you're there. Yeah. So the first thing that you do, that you referred to in your description of how you manage it, in shorthand, you said take a deep breath. And
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine it didn't start off as take a deep breath. It started off as a much more dynamic, nuanced physical practice to down regulate your central nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
into more of a rest, recover, digest space that over time was shortened into take a deep breath. And your
Correct.
brain and your organism knows what you're up to. It's like, oh yeah, the conductor is tapping on her board. Lisa is wants to bring us back here. We're not in threat, and we're not going to create a threat. We're going back down.
Right. Exactly.
And she set the precedent with us to feel safe enough to follow her there. And that's only happens through experiences with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? The old quote, like you're not your thoughts, you're the thinker. You're not your feelings, you're the feeler. You're not your sensations, you're the sensor. And
Mm.
you have a body, you are a soul. And here I want you to think about soul being your higher self, your observer self,
Mm-hmm.
your identity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who Lisa is. So initially what we have to do is down regulate our central nervous system out of fight or flight to give ourselves an opportunity to get blood flow out of our appendages, out of our arms and legs that are being prioritized by our body to throw
Yep.
hands, to fight our way out of a situation,
Mm-hmm.
and reprioritize that blood flow to our frontal lobe
Mm-hmm.
in our brain so that we can actually use our executive functioning, if and then thinking, reality testing, all the beautiful cognitive skills that make humans humans.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, consider, well, where do I need to set boundaries?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the intuitive wisdom of that emotional experience. But it's pretty impossible to consider how to consider how to do that and to execute doing that in a way that is pro-social while we are in fight or flight.
Yeah.
And almost in a similar way to if you've been around people or dealt with folks who have significant addictions
Mm-hmm.
or significant, if someone is in a really intense state of craving, you can't just say like, the alcohol is going to kill you. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have the alcohol. So I don't want the alcohol. Like, the crack's going to kill you. The meth's going to kill you. The heroin's going to kill you. Like, you shouldn't want it. Oh yeah, good point. So I don't
Okay,
want
I'll
it
quit
anymore.
right now.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
No. No.
There is self-regulation practices and time spent in them need to occur before that craving state moves past, and we can think clearly and we can bring online again all those beautiful cognitive skills that human beings have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's two-pronged.
Yeah.
So regulating the central nervous system to give ourselves permission to work through the emotional experience. It's not regulating the emotion, regulating our body so we can
Right.
work through the emotion.
Oh, I'm so glad you clarified that. Exactly. Because the trauma is in our body. The situation, it's in our body. And so our body is reacting
Mhm.
to the feeling, to the emotion. And so that totally makes sense. I'm so glad you separated that, because we need to get this calmed down, because that's exactly what I do. First, I recognize, okay, I'm clearly triggered because I can tell by my emotions. I can tell by I'm angry. I went from, because and I'm thinking back to the last big trigger I had, which was last year. And it was the first time that I caught the trigger from the beginning and walked it through all the way to the end. And I cannot tell you how empowering that was. It was empowering to realize, oh, that was a trigger. And
Yeah.
and I also recognize where the trigger came from. And it came from a childhood belief,
Mhm.
something that had happened to me. And the people that triggered me, or it wasn't their fault at all, had no idea. And what they were saying was completely innocent. They were not being mean or anything, but me,
Yeah.
and in the moment, what was so hard is when I was first triggered, I was sitting in a situation where I couldn't just like I wanted to, right? It
Sure.
wasn't, it was like I had to, I just had to hold it in. And then when I was in my safe place with my husband was when I really recognized I was triggered, because I was just saying what was ever on my mind, and he was just sitting there smiling, and I said, "Well, clearly I'm being triggered. Clearly I'm being triggered, and we're not going to do this crazy thing that I'm saying that we're going to do. We're going to go do this smart thing that I really think we should do, that you've been telling me we should do."
Nice to
and
bring
that,
you back in the room, Lisa. This is
yeah,
the woman I
welcome
love.
back.
Nice to
Welcome
see
home.
you. Yeah.
I have such a sweet husband too, because I'll just tell him, okay, I'm going to sound off. And he just, okay, I don't do that much anymore, but it's
It's a
just,
basic human need.
it is. And and it's so empowering to realize that. And then what was even more empowering is I could understand the whole story. I understood where it came from. Okay, put that away. I understand where it came from. And now I need to get myself calmed down and I need to make a right decision. And it was so empowering. I can't say enough of that.
Oh, there's nothing more empowering than realizing you're the conductor of the orchestra.
Right.
You're not some rogue percussion section.
Right, right, right. And one thing that's powerful too, and I've used to say this about everybody else, and now I'm just saying it about myself is, um, and I just forgot it. It just went out the window. Hang on a second. Um,
I'm sure it'll come back.
is separating the who from the do,
Hmm.
separating what you do from who you are.
Mhm.
Right. And I say that about other people, and I can do that for other people. Like I can understand that person's behavior and not get so upset with them because I understand where it's coming from.
Mhm.
But I wasn't doing that with myself. So I had to separate my behavior and who I am. And my behavior is not my identity. And that probably could be a good segue into the survival mode, which is
Sure.
what I did most of my life. And so I was in the survival mode partially because of my past, partially because of the marriage that I was in. I was the one that was having to take care of everything.
Mhm.
And so if something happened, because my anxiety and everything was already at a high level, it didn't take much for me to just completely blow up all the time.
Sure.
It did that all the time. So tell us about survival mode and what that is. I understand what it is, but tell our
Mhm.
listeners what that is.
So the earlier talked a little bit about fight or flight and freeze.
Yeah.
And so let's bring that back. That's basically all survival mode is when you feel like in order to get by and survive the acute experience, what's happening right now, that you either have to fight, run, or shut down.
Mm-hmm. I do both.
And people that have experienced a degree of trauma tend to do both. Tend
Mm-hmm.
to spend most of our energy until we like do more and more of our healing work, dysregulated and
Mm-hmm.
flying back and forth between fight, flight, and sometimes learning to be highly productive in professional settings
Yeah.
and getting high fives for it, and then getting home and shutting down and bed rotting or whatever and freeze.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I did that. I definitely did that. And it's like you're always on alert too, right? So that's the way I felt. Like when I think back to it, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I think back on it, I was always looking for something to go wrong.
Yeah, there's this constant expectation of catastrophe.
Yeah,
And
totally.
in fight flight, it tends to be characterized by anxiety and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then in freeze, it tends to be characterized by shame.
Right.
The awful things will happen because I'm an awful person, and that's the only way things can happen with awful people like me who would want to love a girl or a boy like me.
Mm-hmm. Right. And and I think how I got out of survival mode was it was more than one thing that helped get me out of it. I can't pinpoint
Mm-hmm.
to, oh, that one modality is what actually helped me get out of survival mode. I think it was just, for me, a lot of it was, I think, the self-awareness and starting to pay attention. And I mean, for me, I had this belief system that nobody liked me, right? So
Sure.
I that's what I always saw. And so that's what I always believed. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's how I walked. That's how I walked through my life. I mean, I didn't take people serious because well, they don't like me anyway. And here, I went along and I was hurting these people. So I don't know what finally brought me out of it. I
You're
guess,
you're right. It was a lot of different things.
yeah,
Because
yeah. So tell
if
us.
in short, you have to create a life that you don't have to survive.
Ooh, yeah, that's exactly what I did.
And human
Oh,
beings have a lot of different needs. and we're all kind of unique creatures in and of ourselves as well. That's going to be, we're going to have a lot of those things in common, but each of us are going to have some that are kind of just specific to who we are and how we're supposed to move and where our personal integrity lies. What our innate knowledge, gifts, skills, talents, and abilities are, how we go about empowering ourselves and empowering our community so we can lean into servant leadership. But it is about creating a life that we no longer have to prioritize surviving.
That's exactly what I did. And I cannot tell you how many times in my life when I've gone through this healing that I've done stuff and then I find out later, well, that was the right thing to do, or that was seriously, because I just remember thinking I hated living in chaos, and that's what I grew up in. And then that's what the first marriage I was in. And again, I'm not saying it was his fault. It was us. It was us. I definitely added that chaos. And I got so tired of the drama and the chaos and constantly waiting for the shoe to drop and constantly being in fear. And I remember visualizing what I wanted my life to look like. And when I look back on it, I absolutely took steps in my life to create that. And the life that I have now is so different than what I had. And one of the things that is really important to both my husband and I is that our home is our sanctuary. And that is the place that we go that is safe, that we can just be ourselves. It's, and we create it for others as well. But and the life that I'm living now is so different than I used to. And the choices that I make are so different. And they're not on the fly all the time. Because it's like every decision I made I was on the fly all the time. I felt like had to go, 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 go all the time. So that's probably another symptom of being in survival mode is don't rest, just go, 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 go.
Yeah, racing thoughts, with a rapid
Overthinking.
heartbeat. But all overthinking is describing the mental framework or the cognitive framework with anxiety. And our culture tends to have a pretty pathological view of mental health. So like pop psychology comes up with all these different nicknames for symptoms that are well defined and that we know what they are. We're like, I'm an overthinker. I'm an overthinker. Like, you have anxiety. Like you're not crazy. It's the humans are a pretty neurotic primate. Like we're prone to it. Let's help you decrease your experience of anxiety and however you subjectively go through that. But and it can even, whether it's about trauma and having the survival modes left over, or whether it's about just not letting our neurotic primate self get the best of us as well. I guess as example, I've got an 8-year-old son who is just this super, super high energy, little fast twitch muscle boy. Like he would have been a heck of a tracker and hunter.
Back in the day.
Back, yeah. So like if you think about like he's like a working border collie or a Belgian Malinois type little boy. He's a great wrestler. He just won like first in the state in his weight class. He's in second grade.
Holy
And
cow.
like gotta have like places to put it, but like he revs up so quickly and it's just innate. He's prone to being a little anxious and neurotic. We're
Sure.
going to work through those things and learn how to lean into contact sports. And that's the place it needs to be. And the only other place it gets to exist is if you're fighting your way out of a corner. And if it comes up any other way, you don't get to go to wrestling that week and you pay for it out of your allowance. And like ways that teach
Correct.
how to use this pro socially without smacking our kids, and like you have the leverage, so you get to have control. That's not a good lesson. So he's really into sports. We were watching this last Super Bowl, and I can like see him as an adult already. Those guys who are like watching and like pacing around everywhere and being like, and it was like, oh, buddy, like I wish. That's got to be a hard way to live sometimes. And like he's also good at it, but it is what it is. So he's watching, he's like, he's kind of going through this stuff. And something happened that there was like an interception or a sack, and he just like punches the pillow that's on the couch, and I'm like, hey man, you can't be watching the game if the only way that you know how to let out energy is to practice being aggressive towards an inanimate object. If that's the case, it's just maybe it's too late, it's time to go to bed, but I'm not going to let you rehearse that behavior
Yeah.
because especially because it's fast twitch muscle little human, and that's an enormous amount of privilege to have, which comes with an enormous amount of responsibility.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you rehearse this isn't like the punching bag lesson is not a good lesson. When you get angry, go hit the button. No.
Yeah.
So instead, and this is, I have a lot of experience in the field that happened to come in handy on this occasion. So like, hey man, so like right now, when that happened, where did you feel it in your body?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, like my hands. Like just, like saw him doing this, was like they started making a fist, didn't they? And he was like, yes. And like, okay. So I want you to do this. I want you to take your hands, like put the game on pause real quick. Take your hands, draw them into fists, pull them as tight as you can for 5 seconds. Countdown. And I was doing it with them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now I want you to spread your fingers apart as far as they can. Let's create tension in the other direction. Right? 5 seconds, hard as you can. Back in the fist. And we did a set of 5 of those where he's just practicing. There's all this tension in the fascia, in the muscles in his hands. So we were giving a place for it to go that
Yeah.
wasn't letting him be in fight or flight.
Right.
And then after the 5 repetitions of this for 5 seconds each in an isometric contraction,
Mm-hmm.
then I want you to take your hands and I want you to shake them out now. And I want you to like lean your head back and make this, like whatever noise comes out of your mouth is okay. And knowing that it was going to be some
Oh.
version of like, wah,
Yeah.
which is like humming, which
Mm-hmm.
stimulates the ventral vagus nerve,
Exactly.
also helps regulate your central nervous system. And then I want you to take a deep breath. How do you feel? I'm calm. All right, well, let's watch the game. And he's like, okay. And then, like next time it came up,
Yay.
he's like fist, pause, do it again. Like goes through.
Oh
Like you
my
start creating
gosh.
just in like this is how you experience that activity without having to be in fight or flight and start
That's
developing a repertoire very early.
that's so awesome that you taught him that at such a young age,
Oh,
so
yeah.
that because that's the thing, like you were saying earlier. I mean, I've had these long, numerous conversations with my one girlfriend about how we raise men,
Oh
and
gosh.
and we raise them to be aggressive and no, don't cry, and be
Yeah.
tough and suck it up, buttercup, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And and I love that you're doing that. You're teaching him how to release that energy he has to release it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you're teaching him how to do it in a positive way that's
Mm-hmm.
positive for him and everyone around him.
In a pro-social way that's not
Right.
aggressive or threatening to anybody,
And it
and
worked.
helps him not feel like he has to fight. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
right, right, right. It was something that was positive. And so, oh, I love that. I love that. And so I love the key to getting out of survival mode is creating the life that you want.
Mhm.
How could our listeners start? So let's say this is the first time they're hearing this. What would be the first
Mhm.
thing that they should do?
Well, I think each of your listeners probably have their own goals. So
Oh, do they?
first,
I hope so.
well, if you don't, then that's the first thing that you need to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like, what are your goals in life?
What do you want?
And maybe at the beginning they just look so big, the first jot list you come up with. So okay, so they're big. So those are your long-term goals.
Right.
So now what are the medium-term goals that help you get to the long-term goals? And then from there, break it down even further. What are the
Baby
short-term goals?
steps.
And then how do we help you? How do you help yourself have discipline in engaging in those short-term achievable goals? And some of them need to be having self-care and self-regulation
Mm-hmm.
practices at regular enough intervals to have access to the beautiful human parts of you that are here for a reason. You're an integral part of the human race. Your DNA has been alive and reflected in the cosmos. You're stardust.
Yeah.
And humans, we are social tribal creatures,
Mm-hmm.
and nature rewards biodiversity. We're all here for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So let's help you be who you are and lean into enough of what you're good at and what makes you happy, how you bring joy and purpose and meaning and value to yourself and those around you. And let's start getting focused on living.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you mentioned about the self-regulation and the self-care, because especially for those of us that have had abuse and trauma as children, I mean, that goes out the window. And for somebody like me, my job, even as a child, because I lost my mom when I was 16, to cancer, and helped take care of her. And then I helped take care of my dad. And then I helped take care of my late husband. So I was this person that was out to have to take care of everybody else, and ran myself into the ground. I was sick a lot. And if, I wanted to go take a nap because I was tired, I would feel guilty about it. And so that was a whole job in and of itself, is just figuring out first how to take care of myself, and then
Yeah.
to take care of myself without feeling guilty.
Yeah, is it you've been conditioned to feel shame about doing it, and that
Correct.
helped you survive getting by prioritizing other people, not seeing yourself as just as worthy of this caretaking as anyone else. So someone listening is going like, yeah, me too, I identify as a caretaker. Well, how do you do in taking care of yourself?
Right.
And if your answer is not very well, then you're not a caretaker.
Exactly.
If there's not
Exactly.
reciprocity to how that value functions, it's not a value.
Exactly. Exactly. And you are not going to have the ability to really take care of others unless you take care of yourself first. You
Oh yeah,
can't, it's the airplane, if the airplane's going down and
oxygen
yeah,
mask.
the
Yeah.
oxygen max drops. Yeah, it's the same thing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so true. And I found that to be true. And being a caretaker is exhausting, and you don't get a break. You really don't. And so it is really important that you make that time and to take care of yourself. And but I got to the point where I could take care of myself, but then I would feel severe guilt. And so for a long time, I know I wasn't taking care of myself to the degree that I should have, because I was feeling all the guilt. And so now I don't feel guilt. With this, even just doing this podcast, I'm doing so much research, and I mean, it's a dark subject. It takes a lot of energy. And you probably can relate to this, that you do have to make sure that you have that time for yourself to rejuvenate, because this stuff can take a lot of energy out of you.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
this has been great. This has been really helpful. I
Good.
cannot tell you how much I appreciate. I would love to have you back again, because I know I could just. There's so many more subjects and videos that you've done that I'm like, oh, I could do a whole podcast on that.
It's fun. It's been nice being on the podcast with you, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you as well as share some of this information with your listeners.
Yeah, so let's definitely stay connected, because I think you have a lot of value and a lot of stuff that you can help other people with. And you guys got to go on TikTok and watch his videos, I'm telling you. So why don't you tell our listeners how they could reach out to you, how they could find you?
Sure, sure. You can go to either TikTok, Facebook, or Instagram. On TikTok and Instagram, you can find me under the handle Healing Humanity 777, with the 777 really just being a nod to um, spirituality that's not
Mm-hmm.
rooted in a specific theology, and that everybody is supposed to be their own uh, protective spirit, right? And like if everybody's supposed to be the conductor of their own orchestra.
Yeah.
You stop waiting for someone else to come rescue you.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be an inside job. And then on Facebook, just under my name, Logan Cohen, you can find me there. I've started to upload content there too, as well as YouTube. Um,
And your
let's
website,
see, my website, you can go to logancohen.com
a lot of good
and
information there.
read a little bit more about me, see some other information, offer coaching virtually with folks all over the world.
Good. I was going to
Um,
ask you that because I know that some therapists can only work in certain states, but you can work in all
yeah.
over.
So what
Good.
I've been doing this work long enough that I've distilled the recovery experience down to very actionable, teachable, behaviorally focused components. Um, and that humans learn through experience. We integrate information through experience, and there's just some attachment and developmental and social gaps that anyone who has dealt with a degree of trauma is going to struggle with.
Hmm.
And the coaching that I do with folks all over the world is focused on those gaps and helping you put some of those pieces together so you can do this important work of rescuing yourself, of creating a life that you no longer need to be primarily focused on surviving. I wrote a book called How to Human Up in Modern Society, Heal Yourself and Save the World, that you can find at your major retailer, book retailer that's local, as well as on Amazon.
Hmm.
It's specifically geared towards waking men up to how their male privilege is killing them, as well as
Oh, I love
a
that.
risk of harm to those around them, and gearing
Hmm.
male privilege and power and control and refocusing into servant leadership. So whether you're a man or whether you love a man or are raising a young man, I think it
Hmm.
is really helpful information to have. Um, and there's also a online curriculum that I developed, like self-guided coaching curriculum specifically for men um, who are sheepish about going and seeking out help directly from a professional quite yet. And that
Oh,
tends to be the primary barrier for men getting the
yeah,
help that they need,
yes.
is the kind of self-imposed masculinity stuff that's
Hmm.
doesn't set men up to be very good men anyway. And then from there, they can take it in whatever other pro-social direction they would like. That's at balancedmanplan.com.
Oh,
Um,
God.
so yeah, that's me.
That's
That's
you.
all I say.
Well, and we're going to have all these links. Would you say balanced man?
Balancedmanplan.com and
Okay.
logancohen.com.
Got it. Well, we'll have all these links available for everybody as well. And so last question, what do you want to leave our listeners with?
Mm. Yeah, it would be that you're here for a reason.
Thank you.
Everybody is. And we got 8 billion people in the world where we're all literally living in each other's backyard. And we all live in the same home of Earth.
Hmm.
To unless who are you to keep yourself from the cosmos, from all of us? Like
Yeah.
let's do what we need to do to plant the trees that need to be planted, so
Oh, I love
so,
that.
so our kids get some shade.
Oh, I love that. That's precious. Seriously. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. And it's true.
Absolutely.
We need to come together. We do, and create unity. And I love that you said that you're here for a reason. You're here for me. And you're taking that away from me. And oh, I love that. You're going to get me going. You're going to get me going. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This
Absolutely.
has been
Pleasure.
great. And yeah, I would love to have you back again because there's much more we could talk about. So thank you.
Sure.